Welcome back to class, everybody. It's Bram Duffee. And today we're going to explore how people from different backgrounds communicate with each other. This is called intercultural communication. And we're going to look at why this skill is so important in our connected world. We'll talk about groups of people called diasporas who move to new countries and create new opportunities for cultural exchange. And we'll also learn about border dwellers, who are people who live between cultures and how they adapt. A big part of our discussion will be about cultural values, the unspoken rules that guide how we act, and how they shape our conversation. And then, of course, we'll spend some time talking about the internet, especially social media, and how social media can create an algorithmic bubble. That's something that limits what we see and how we develop media literacy. So these are things that are worth talking about so that we can understand our world and be able to even interpret global events. So one of the main reasons it's so important to understand intercultural communication is that we have more chances than ever to meet people from other cultures. We travel more, folks study in other cultures more, and people move to new places all the time. And this means that we're always in contact with new and diverse cultural environments. And I want to think about this term diaspora. The word diaspora comes from a word that means to spread out and like distribute, disperse, So diaspora, it describes groups of people who move to new homes, often because they have to leave due to things like war, money problems, or natural disasters. And when these communities arrive in their new homes, they of course bring their own unique culture with them. This creates opportunities for people from different backgrounds to be able to learn from one another. But to understand diaspora better, we can look at the work of Robin Cohen. And Robin Cohen studies how these communities help their cultural traditions stay alive while also being able to fit into their new homes. And his research shows that these groups don't just blend in quietly. Instead, they actively help shape the culture of the countries that they move to. You can see this in a way that folks might keep their language or their food and other traditions alive. And these things can influence local habits. So, for example, Indian food traditions have been kept alive in the United Kingdom by diaspora kinds of communities. And this not only preserved their identity, but it also made British culture much richer. And so when we see how much these groups contribute, it helps us to understand that intercultural communication is a two-way street, and customs end up being shared. So imagine that you're traveling in like Argentina, and you meet someone from a totally different culture like Morocco. By talking with this person, you don't just learn about their culture, you also learn about how they see the world, and that might be very different from how you see it. So study abroad programs give students similar kinds of opportunities. And when international students come into a classroom, they bring their own viewpoints. And then in return, they learn about the country that they're visiting from the inside. And so these kinds of interactions make everyday things like studying or traveling much more meaningful. Another area where understanding different cultures is very important is in business. So think about this kind of situation. Imagine you work for a global company and you might have meetings that are often happening from Japan and Germany. And so if you don't know about the different culture rules in each country, you could easily cause a misunderstanding. This could slow down a project or even damage your work relationships. So, for instance, in some cultures, being too direct can seem rude or aggressive. And on the other hand, when employees are trained in intercultural communication, they become better collaborators. They become better at collaborating because they can think of more creative ideas, already knowing that these norms exist. And studies show that teams with members from different cultural backgrounds are often more innovative because they have a wider range of perspectives. We have also seen what happens when companies completely ignore cultural differences. A famous example is when a car company launched a new model called Nova, and the name sounded great in English, but the company didn't realize that in Spanish, Nova means it doesn't go. So you can imagine, as you might guess, the car did not sell well among folks who spoke Spanish. And so this was a clear example of why businesses need to be aware of cultural details. Now, let's look at the bigger picture. Intercultural communication is also very useful for improving how different groups get along in a society. Every day, people from various cultures interact with each other, and this happens through migration, on social media, and in different diverse workplaces. But sometimes this contact can lead to tension, and these problems might come from different government rules, argues over things like borders or social issues like limits on immigration. These tensions often lead to difficult conversations and misunderstandings. So we're talking about things that do impact government, but it's all too often that when you do international business, things are very related and matter. And so this shows why we need better skills in intercultural communication to help not just build peace, but also to practice international business. And peacekeeping is a key way to solve conflicts before they become violent. So for each of us as individuals, learning how to talk effectively with people from other cultures is just a step towards helping us all live together peacefully. And there are no simple solutions for old cultural conflicts, but every step that we take to understand each other is a step in the right direction. So can you think of a recent news story where good intercultural communication helped solve a real world problem? I sure can. I can think of 2 or 3 off the top of my head. And so sometimes things happen through negotiating, other times they happen through cultural influences. And it's just that studying intercultural communication is going to help us grow as a person as we think through, especially how we can be more self-aware. People don't think about how their own cultural heritage or their own culture shapes the way that they communicate, especially until they meet someone from a very different style. I remember that when I look back at tapes of when I was a child back in Southern Illinois, that my accent showed through very strong as a Southern Illinois accent as compared to now. And so things change, but I know that I still bring with me some of those common words. Another example is a student that I can think of named Susan from the American Midwest, and she traveled to another country for the first time. And Susan realized that her normal way of being casual and direct came across as rude in a culture that valued being less direct and more formal. So this experience helped her think about her own habits and where they came from. So think about your own communication style. Are you direct, or are you more indirect? And is it situational for you? Can you remember a time when you learned something about yourself and how you might be a communicator that's different than someone from a different culture? I know that in the South, a part of the United States, it might be considered rude to be snappy and demanding with requests, and up north, the opposite could be seen as true. And so, even within the United States, these are different ways of communicating. So, when we think of intercultural communication, it's not necessarily just, it could be a different language, but not necessarily. So, intercultural communication is not something, it's something that compares one to another. And so culture is not something that stays the same. It changes over time, and it's different everywhere. And this means that every interaction between cultures can be unique. Culture also exists within the society rules and within power dynamics. And that means that communicating across cultures can be even more complex. One important idea that I brought up in the introduction was about border dwellers. And these are people who live on or move across different cultural borders. And these are folks, a label that we use to talk about folks in this category. And they obviously face challenges, but they also have some opportunities to learn, because they're going to be experiencing different cultural worlds. For instance, many people become border dwellers by traveling. Some people choose to travel, like students who study in another country or people who move for a new job. Others are forced to travel, or often because of war or natural disasters. Refugees who have to leave their homes, and all of these folks find themselves in a place with unfamiliar cultural rules. So adjusting can be a huge culture for them. I remember talking to friends who have moved to a new culture, and it's more than just a culture shock, because over time there's an effort to gain a new personal identity and understand your environment differently. And so to understand what border dwellers experience, we can look at the model that our textbook talks about, called the U-curve theory of adjustment. And this work by Oberg explains that when people move to a new culture, they go through different stages. So first, there's a honeymoon phase where everything is new and exciting, and this is followed by a frustration and a shock of a culture shock kind of time, as new rules and customs become difficult. And over time, as they adjust, they start to feel comfortable again. And there's also another theory that was added to this called the W-curve theory. And this theory points out that even returning home can cause its own kind of shock again, sort of like a reverse culture shock. And so think about now, if you've done any significant travel, if you've experienced this, and because this happens because your home country might have changed, or you might feel out of place because you've been away for so long. And so understanding these stages can help us see how strong and adaptable immigrants and long-term travelers have to be. To know about it, it's like the experience of border dwellers is unique because they often deal with both the culture shock and the reverse culture shock. Because culture shock is a feeling of being lost or uncomfortable in a new place with different customs. But when they go back home, they can have trouble fitting back in. Their own culture can feel strange because after they've gotten used to something, another thing kind of like comes in. And so, for example, I know of a young woman from Pakistan who studied in the United States, and she worked hard to get used to the American classroom style, and that's a style where we do discuss topics openly. And that was very different from the lecture-based classes that she was used to back home. And so when she returned to Pakistan, she found it hard to, get used to the old system. And people also become border dwellers through how they're raised. Think about people who grow up in multicultural families, like someone with biracial parents or someone with a minority a religion, a minority religion from the area that they're in. A person might be both African American and Korean American, right? And in that respect, feel like they fit into several worlds, but just not a single one at the same time. And so these kinds of multicultural, dimensional identities can help people feel flexible, but it can also help them feel like they're always sort of stuck between different cultures. So the people who become border dwellers through relationships, like when they marry someone from a different culture or race, we see that society is becoming more accepting of those kinds of relationships, but they also have special challenges. For example, a couple might have to figure out how to handle different family expectations, right? So you think about over time, there might be a blend of cultures that happen together, but they're likely going to need to have important talks about holiday traditions or how to raise kids or religious customs. And so by understanding and respecting the other person's cultural background, couples can learn to work through those differences in a positive way. I want to help us move to think more about how values can influence our communication, because there's something called cultural values. And cultural values are the basic beliefs that shape how people see the world and interact with others. So those values act like unspoken rules within a culture, and that helps us understand or see what's considered to be normal behavior. And they often have a big impact on how we communicate. So we think about when we talk, when we don't talk, and how we communicate when we do communicate, right? Because, well, one key difference is between this whole individualism and collectivism, right? And this might be something that you're familiar with, because we know that individualistic kinds of cultures, like in the United States, focus on more of a personal independence and personal achievement. And for example, I was raised as a Boy Scout, right? And so it was a focus of my childhood to get merit badges and to grow and learn, right? So people in these cultures often learn to be self-reliant and to sort of chase their own dreams. And in contrast, collectivist cultures, like in Japan, maybe, or other countries like that, might put the needs of the group or a family first. So in these societies, keeping harmony and working together is more important than just individual desires. And many families and collectivist cultures make big decisions as a group. So think about how you were raised. Did your family encourage you to be independent, or was the focus more on shared responsibilities? So how did that shape, you? Well, we can understand this difference better through Hofstede's cultural dimensions theory. And this, you'll find this in your text. And this theory outlines 6 key areas where cultures are known to be different. And one of those is the individualism versus collectivism. And Hofstede's research shows just how much cultural rules that are out there affect our behavior every day, both at home and at work and in relationships. And so, for example, in a highly individualistic society, some of the workplace decisions might be based on what's best for one person's career. In a collectivist culture, decisions would be more likely based on what's better for the team or the family, right? And so Hofstede's ideas are a very helpful tool for anybody who is working with people from different backgrounds. Another important value is the difference between doing and being. Cultures that focus on doing value hard work and reaching their goals. On the other hand, being oriented cultures can be more about relationships and enjoying life. So I'm thinking about island culture a little bit here. But a workplace with both types of folks might have some problems. So some team members might only want to get tasks done, while other people on the team might be more concerned about building personal connections with their coworkers first. So a culture's ideas about human nature, power, and the environment also change how people communicate. Some cultures believe that people are mostly good, and this is reflected in their justice systems. And that means that their justice system might focus on helping people improve rather than just punishing them. Other cultures believe that people have flaws that need to be controlled with strict rules and punishments. And kind of like that, there are views out there on power distance. Power distance is how comfortable people are with leaders having more power. And that can be very different. So in a country with low power distance like Sweden, employees might talk to their managers very informally. And in a country with really high power distance, employees are expected to be much more formal, right? So understanding these cultural differences can help us be more thoughtful and when we're communicating with people from other backgrounds. So let's also talk about how the internet shapes our views of other cultures. The social media apps out there and websites that we use every day are designed to show us things that they think that we will like, right? They use computer programs or algorithms to create a personalized experience for each user. And so these programs create something called an algorithmic bubble. And this happens because the system shows you more of what you've already liked or more of what you've already watched in the past. And so while this can be helpful, it also means that you may not see posts or videos that are there that would come from people with different opinions or maybe even people from other cultures. So it narrows your worldview. And it doesn't matter who you are, you have that potential to have your worldview narrowed to your very specific thoughts. Maybe these are just your initial inclinations, but this influence works aggressively over time because they feed on the platforms, and those platforms want you to be engaged. And they also might filter out voices that speak other languages or come from other parts of the world. And so this can reinforce a single limited view of the world. Now, you can take steps to fix this. You can pop your own bubble by making an effort to find and allow news sources and creators from other countries to come into your life. You can also go into your account settings and change how they show you content. But I would suggest, most importantly, you can just look for original voices from communities that you want to learn more about, instead of just seeing what other people say about them. And when it comes to news, I view multiple sides of a news question, especially if it's political related, because it seems that, unlike when I went to journalism school, now we're in a position where even folks that are announcing the news are not not coming across as unbiased. So that's why I want to talk about a little bit of media literacy, because to become a responsible communicator, you have to learn how to look at information with a critical eye. And it's important to remember that every story is told from a certain cultural point of view. And when you read news or when you watch a video, watch which details are highlighted and which ones are left out. Be on that lookout for language that's dehumanizing, which means that it treats people less than human, right? Or language that's essentializing, which might reduce a whole group of people to a simple stereotype. You can practice this skill in a few ways. One thing is, like I had mentioned, to try to triangulate information. So get your information from more than one news source, more than one place. And also look closely at the pictures and the captions and see what message they're trying to send. By using precise language that puts people first, and by questioning the stories that we're told, we can become active, informed, and respectful communicators in our global world. And I will say that the more respected that you become in different circles, the more influential your opinion matters. And to some people, your opinion, whether it's an educated one or a correct one, or no matter what, might influence how that person thinks of you. So all of these things are important to consider. And in our talk, we have seen how important it is to understand one another, especially in a world that's really connected. And we've talked about how diasporas enrich new places, and how border dwellers navigate different cultural worlds. And we've talked about how deep-seated cultural values guide our actions. We talked about modern technology and social media algorithms and how they can create bubbles that separate us. And so as you move forward, think maybe about one step that you could take this week to better understand someone that's different from yourself. And that's how we begin to build a more connected and understanding world, especially knowing that there's a lot against us right now in the world of social media and the way that we are siloed from the information that we get. Good talking to you, and I look forward to our discussion board time, and so I'll see you then.